The Australian Financial Review.
Hello, I'm James Thompson, Senior Chanticleer columnist at the AFR. Welcome to our weekly news breakdown of all things business, finance and markets. With me today, as always, is my Chanticleer colleague. I'm giving him my vote and sending him my preferences. It's Anthony McDonald. How are you, Anthony?
Oh, we're in for a whole lot of fun, James.
Fantastic. Well, this week we take an early look at the issues that could shape the election that was finally called on Friday. We break down the federal budget and we ask why the reject shop got a French champagne takeover bid. Well, Anthony, it's on.
My fellow Australians, this morning I visited the Governor-General and Her Excellency has accepted my advice that an election be held on Saturday, 3rd of May 2025. Over the last few years...
We'll be diving into the election in the second half of today's pod. But Anthony, let's start with some business. Let's start with some deals. And we've seen a few this week. The big property classifieds company Domain, which is 60% owned by our employer Nine Entertainment Co., got an improved takeover bid and looks very likely to be snapped up by a US group called CoStar. But the real excitement was with the discount retailer that I'm sure most Australians know, the Reject Shop, which got a bid from a Canadian retailer. I think the technical term for a bid like this, Anthony, is being hit in the bum with a rainbow. Tell us what happened.
James, this was an absolute M&A miracle, a gift from the gods. The Reject Shop, we all know what it is. Cheap stuff, lots of stores, nationwide, no real competitors. They've been listed on the ASX since 2004. For the past sort of 10 years, it's been middling around, drifting at the bottom of the ASX. It's got a few investors that own shares, but it hasn't really caught many other people's attention. Which, to be honest, James, is probably the last time a lot of us shopped there as well, was when investors got excited about it, right? Like it's just fallen off the radar. It's been limping along, and then out of nowhere on Thursday, it got a takeover bid from a big Canadian discount retailer called Dollarama.
What a name!
I got to admit, I'd never heard of Dollarama, but its main business over in Canada is similar to the Reject Shop, discount stores, where it sells nothing for more than $5.
Wow.
So the whole store, $5 or less.
My kind of shop.
Yeah. Now, James, this company, Dollarama, it's got about $4 billion of revenue and about $2 billion of earnings, which is a lot. But its market capitalization is $41 billion.
Whoa.
Now, James, $41 billion, that's more than our Woolworths.
Jeez.
So this thing, Dollarama, is worth more than Australia's biggest supermarkets company.
Amazing.
Anyway, so it launches this bid. It's all cash. It's unconditional. There's little, if any, regulatory conditions. There's releases franking credits. And James, it was at a 112% premium to the Reject Shop's last close. It's more than double the price of where Reject Shop shares were. Like, it's amazing. Now, Reject Shop shareholders, they won't be able to accept this one quick enough, James.
Yeah, totally.
Whoever negotiated this deal for the Reject Shop, give them a medal. Like, it's a cracker. Anyway, good luck to Dollarama. It'll be interesting to see what they do with the Reject Shop, James. They've already said they want to get the store count to about 700 from 390 today. So we're going to see more Reject Shops out there on the streets.
Really?
Please report back next time you go there, James, and let us know if you notice any changes under the Canadian ownership. They're going to grow their network. They're a little bit wary that in Australia, the labour costs and the cost of rent are a bit higher. They pointed that out to their own shareholders. But they're coming here and they're going to have a crack. So good luck to them and congratulations to the Reject Shop and the Reject Shop shareholders who, after a torrid decade, again paid out something decent. But James, the big deal this week, right? And I think you've forgotten about it because it happened on Monday.
Yes,
was James Hardie paying US $8.8 billion or $14 billion in Australian money for a decking company called ASIC. Now, you covered it. The market response has been shocking. James Hardie shares are down about 20% since the deal was announced. What's going on?
Well, Anthony, you know how they say a good deal is when nobody walks away happy?
Yeah.
Well, this isn't a case of that. So if you can believe it, James Hardie's investors are sitting there saying, oh my God, you are overpaying for this business. In the US, some of ASIC's shareholders have launched legal cases because the company is being sold too cheaply, they reckon.
Really?
But look, I mean, you just have to look at the reaction of on the local market. James Hardie shares down 20%. Investors hate this one. They think they're overpaying. They're not sure of the synergies here. So James Hardie's management team has promised, they can get about $350 million US in cost savings and increased revenue. Clearly, the market's response says, "No, sorry, we don't believe that." There's a bit of logic to this deal. So we think of James Hardie as plasterboard and fibrous cement. Mm-hmm. In the US, a lot of houses are clad in something called siding, and often the cladding's made of vinyl. In the case of James Hardie, they sell fibre cement. It's very weatherproof, it's very fireproof, it's pest-proof, It lasts a long time. So they do a good business in that. AZEK is a specialist in manufactured timber decking. So not real timber, but a composite, often involving PVC and other recycled materials. It's a similar argument, instead of using wood, which rots and needs maintenance, you whack this Timber True stuff in it, and you don't have to do as much maintenance. Timber True, yeah. It's not quite Dollarama, but it's still a cool name. And so the sort of logic is sound. About 55% of people, when they're whacking new siding on their house in America, they also do the deck out the front and the back. Mm-hmm. So James Hardie's like, well, we can capture the one customer with two products. What could be better? But yeah, as you say, investors just don't like the logic here. They don't like the price paid. Anthony, you're our deals man. Investors are just skeptical of big ticket M&A at the moment, aren't they?
And for good reason, James. We see time and time again Australian companies going offshore, blowing themselves up on these big M&A deals. This one, I think, James, it's actually a bit disappointing. You got an Australian company grown up in Australian capital markets, potentially blowing its brains out on a US acquisition, changing the primary listing over to the US. I mean, it's left a bad taste in investors' mouth.
Yeah.
For the moment, interesting to see what happens from here. But yeah, the share price reaction this week has been much worse than what you would normally expect.
Absolutely savage.
James, of course, it wouldn't be another week in the Trump era without some new tariffs. This week, we got 25% on cars imported into the United States, which is probably pretty predictable and another attempt by the president to protect an ailing old world industry. James, I can't work it out though. Is this good for Trump's mate Elon Musk or not? I thought most of his cars came from China.
Well, it's a good question. I mean, most of his cars sold in America are made in America. But where it gets a little bit more complicated is a lot of the parts for those cars are made overseas. He's got factories in Germany, China, Holland. So there's some puts and takes, but there is an argument to say it's better or maybe less worse for Tesla than it is for other car makers. So look, call it a nil-all draw maybe. Although Tesla has said reciprocal tariffs, which Trump is promising next week, won't be good for the company. So the best friend in chief, as Elon Musk has been called, isn't getting all the favors from Trump. But I think you're right. Anthony, zoom out here. This is all about the growing hit from tariffs to the world trade. We've seen the initial tariffs on China. We've seen tariffs on Mexico and Canada come in and then be withdrawn or suspended. Now we're seeing this sort of tariff stacking where you get broad tariffs on industries, then you get specific tariffs on countries and sectors. It's getting really hard to follow, and we aren't even at the juicy part yet. That's coming on April 2 or April 3 our time, Liberation Day as Trump's calling it. Who knows where this is going to get to, but I think one thing is clear. Trump's strategy is not to use the tariffs as a negotiating tool, as many of us had initially thought. Markets are absolutely nervous about what's going to happen next week. And really, I don't think this is just a next week story. We're not going to get to next Wednesday and it'll all be announced and we'll all go, okay, we get on with life. I mean, the pattern here is that Trump changes things, reworks things, keeps tinkering with things. So it's not hard to see months of tariff controversy, maybe even years, but it's certainly not helping the mood of investors, is it?
No, certainly not. I mean, the irony of all this, James, like we've been talking about tariffs for weeks now on the podcast.
Yeah.
They're only just starting to come into effect. Some of them haven't even come into effect yet. So, companies have had no time to rethink supply chains or actually do anything yet. Yet their share prices and markets are jumping around based on the tariffs, but we haven't even really seen the start of it. And as this week showed, the announcements haven't slowed down yet either of the incoming tariffs. So I think that 2025, just, if you think we've got tariff stacking now, it feels like we're going to be even stacked with more tariff news for the rest of the year.
Yeah. Ironically, Anthony, James Hardie and ASEC make most of their stuff in America.
Oh, good.
So tariffs was one of the things investors didn't have to worry about in that deal, but it didn't help much, obviously. All right, Anthony, it's clearly been such a big week in politics, and we'll sort of take you into the week and build up from the start of the week to the big election announcement on Friday. But the week started with what's almost like Christmas week at the Australian Financial Review, and that's budget week.
Mm-hmm. Speaker, this budget builds on the progress that we have made together. It's a plan to help with the cost of living, with 2 new tax cuts and higher wages.
I jetted up to Canberra to see Treasurer Jim Chalmers hound down the budget on Tuesday, and everyone expected this would be a pretty boring pre-election budget with not much news, but we actually got a little surprise, and that little surprise was an income tax cut, which will hit almost every worker's pocket from July 1, 2026, and then once fully implemented 12 months after that, will be worth, get ready for this, $10 a week. Oof.
That's 2 items at Dollarama.
2 items at Dollarama, indeed. Now, that was designed to show voters that the government hasn't forgotten about cost of living pressures heading into the federal election. And, the voters' pain is still very much at the top of Labor's mind. And there were some other little cost of living measures, including an extension of the $75 a quarter energy rebate till the end of this calendar year. There was increased funding for Medicare to encourage bulk billing. There was lowering the cost and expanding the scope of the pharmaceutical benefits scheme. And importantly, there was also a freeze on the excise for draft beer for those who enjoy a tipple. But the big numbers, Anthony, $27.6 billion deficit this financial year and a $42.1 billion deficit next financial year, and then 10 or 11 years of deficits after that. Anthony, what happened to last year's $15.8 billion surplus?
Feels like a long time ago, doesn't it? Well, let's be honest, James, that surplus last year, that was an absolute fluke. Remember the budget was supposed to be in the red for a lot of the year, and then somehow in the final quarter they get the commodities prices kick in, and then we end in the black, and it was a bit of a surprise. Like, I think we got lucky. This year, not so lucky. Next year, less lucky again. The year after that, less lucky again, and we're going to be less lucky for the foreseeable future, James. So it feels like we're really running into this structural deficit era, and I'm not sure of the way out and why. And it's because the economy isn't growing as fast as it used to, James. That hurts tax receipts. But the spending, which I think we'll get to later, we got a good question on it actually this week. We're stuck in this sort of spending spree where, Australia being the good country it is, the great place to live in, we've set up all these programs, but they actually cost a lot of money to keep doing year in, year out, and they're growing much faster than revenue, hence why we've got these deficits. Now, the deficits are running at about 1% of GDP a year. So you chuck that onto the country's debt, James, which is growing. It'll be back over $1 trillion this year to about 37% of GDP on a gross debt basis, which is a lot, right? 37%. I mean, it's less than the US, the UK, Japan, and others, but it's still a lot of money. But James, you know what gets up my nose?
What's that?
Jim Chalmers did such a good job 2 years ago with the intergenerational report and he sort of lasered some points into our heads about, and this is a bit of a relic of the Michael Stutchbury era of the Fin Review, but remember how there was that in the intergenerational report, it was talking about the outlook for economic growth for the next 40 years was going to be 2.2% a year.
Yes.
Yeah, and remember the 40 years prior to that, the economy was growing at 3.1% a year.
Yes.
So we're coming out of this era of 3.1% a year growth, looking at 40 years of 2.2% a year growth. So there's about a percent difference. Now, that percent doesn't sound like a lot, James, but it's the difference between living standards increasing like they have been, to the point where plenty of Australians are lucky enough to live in houses like they come straight off the block, the TV show, to just flat lighting. That's significant. And Chalmers was the one that was pointing that out and pushing that.
Yeah.
2 years later, we get a budget. Instead of doing those things to fix those long-term structural problems, this is a budget that's full of short-term thinking just because there's an election around the corner, tinkering around with little tax cuts and all these things that aren't that meaningful in the bigger picture. So I just felt like he did such a good job of laying a platform to argue for long-term decision-making, but then with an election around the corner and this budget, we've got this short-term thinking. Am I just being too negative, James?
No, it's a great thing to bring up, Anthony. I, like a lot of our listeners, will have completely forgotten about that. And you're right. Chalmers was really trying to change the economic conversation.
Yeah.
And now with an election called or on Tuesday, the election was moments away, all that stuff goes out the window and we're back arguing about $5 a week tax cuts. I mean, you're right. There's just no vision. And I think that that is the problem here. And I reckon most voters get it. I don't know anyone who would say, yeah, I really need that tax cut.
Yeah.
Over using that $17 billion that the tax cut's going to cost to attack the housing crisis. Find me a voter who's going to make that trade-off. Politicians take us for idiots sometimes. People see these long-term issues. I mean, there wouldn't be a parent or a grandparent who's wondering, how their kids are going to get into housing. I know I'm worrying about it all the time. Yeah. And, the $5 tax cut, let's fix the big problems and then we can attack these smaller ones, not the other way around.
Yeah, James, I just think if we've got a bit of free money, let's invest it, right? And invest it into something that's going to try and make Australia a better place, create some value, whether that's housing, whether that's something that encourages business to invest on the back of that, try and get productivity that way. And instead, we're just handing it out in these tax cuts. Chalmers, having pointed out this great point about the economy and where it's going and how the growth is slowing down. 2 years later, what's he doing about it? Sweet FA. We're just getting these tax cuts. I remember losing my head last year at the energy rebates. This year, it's the little tax cut. But James, I loved your budget day column. You said it was a mediocre budget that was completely fitting with a mediocre corporate Australia and the sort of the mood that's set in the ASX. What did you mean by that?
Well, I got a bit of a steer here from Dion Hershen, who's the head of Australian equities at Yarra Capital Management, a fund manager who's, great thinker about the markets and the country. He made the point that, you look at what's happening on the ASX 200, things are pretty mediocre. I think you mentioned this last week. This will be our third straight year, 2025 financial year, where earnings have not grown. They've gone backwards.
Yeah.
And to me, that's like the budget. We're looking at 10 years of deficit, having just had 2 in a row. And I guess there's other comparisons you make. It's hard now to find a company on the ASX who's growing revenue faster than they're growing costs. And that's the same story for the budget. Costs are growing faster than the revenue we're bringing in. We're spending too much. And, you think of the sort of general malaise in the community about the cost of living crisis, which is completely fair enough. And then you look at household wealth, it's never been higher. $17.2 trillion at the end of this quarter. And I look at that and I think it's like the ASX 200, the market was at a record level 4 weeks ago, but there's no earnings growth. So there's this disconnect that's, to me, it's about this tension between the haves and the have-nots in the community, and that's what should sort of be at the heart of the electoral debate. But instead, we get all this short-term thinking, as we've just described, and we never. There's not a lot of courage either in the government or in corporate Australia to make that big investment that drives long-term sustainable growth. We're all focused on the next half, the next quarter, the next year, rather than the next decade, which is how sort of great companies think. So, yeah, we're getting a bit negative here, but I think there's some interesting parallels, and that's what I was trying to point out. But Anthony, we've got a budget-related question this week. So I know we usually do questions at the end, but this is a good one on the spending side of the budget from our old friend Kevin in the Northern Rivers. We hope you're pulled up in the tropical cyclone okay, Kev. Thanks for sending in this audio question.
Hello, Chooks. Kevin here from the Northern Rivers in New South Wales. And I have a question about this last budget. Government spending has hit a 40-year high. Why are Australians or the opposition party not calling out for a local-style Department of Government Efficiency in the spirit of Elon Musk?
Now, Anthony, Peter Dutton gave the traditional budget in reply speech on Thursday night, and this was actually sort of part of it. He's promising to slash the number of public servants by 41,000, which is a lot of people.
That's a lot.
But his argument is that's what Labor's added over the course of its government. So this is a little bit DOGE, isn't it?
It is. If you look at the expenses, James, in the budget, like obviously it costs a lot to run a country. I think about $785.7 billion they'll spend next year. That's a lot of stuff you buy at Dollarama. Yes. But it looks like expenses are growing the general expenses are growing at about 2.5% a year, James, which is not hideous, but it's on such a big number and it just keeps ticking higher and higher and higher and higher. And to Kevin's point, do we need that sort of one-off someone to come in and just absolutely reset it? And if you look at what we actually spend money on, James, like, it won't surprise you. I mean, the biggest sort of allocation that the government makes is money down to the states, but then it's support for seniors, it's the NDIS, it's aged care, medical benefits to the states again, debt payments, financial support for disability, the pharmaceutical benefits scheme, schools, job seeker. So it's all that welfare, health sort of stuff for the government, which obviously we want the government offering those services. But if you look at what they're doing over in the US, James, with DOGE, it's pretty chaotic.
Yeah.
And it's happening because their problem's a lot worse than ours. I'm sitting here whinging about our debt being 37% of GDP and expenses increasing at 2.5% a year. But over there, the debt is worth 124% of GDP. So that's about 4 times what we're looking at here. And their deficit is running at about another 5, 6, 7% a year of GDP.
Yeah.
So Trump's come in, he's seen that, and they're also trying to cut taxes as well. So they've got pressure. They're creating pressure for themselves on the revenue side at the same time while the expenses were really running away. So I mean that's why they've gone with such a strong cuts program over there. Here, it doesn't feel like we're at that level of emergency.
No, but I mean, can't we find the middle ground here, Anthony? Can't we have sort of a friendly DOGE? I don't think we need sort of wholesale job losses in the public service, but you could be sort of, less sledgehammer, more scalpel. Find the bits of government that aren't working so well. Find the systems and processes that could benefit from better technology, which, over time, over the long term, delivers more efficient government services. Do the work properly. Don't just rush in and try and cut things and then go, oh, no, that service isn't working, which you can see is happening with Musk's efforts. Promise to get spending down in a considered way. I don't think any side of politics wouldn't find support for that. It's a no-brainer. We're going to try and get government spending down by using technology in a smarter way to make government services run more efficiently for you. Yes, please, tick. I mean, I don't think this has to be sort of like, an emergency blow up the joint process like Musk seems to be approaching things with, does it?
No, that's good, James. Yeah, a moderate DOGE, as much as that's an oxymoron. If we could find that, if we could walk that line, definitely. Let's do it now. James, you mentioned Peter Dutton and his budget reply speech. That came out on Thursday night. You said that he's talking about cutting back the public service. I think it's saving $7 billion, he said, by doing that. None of that happens immediately. That's if you add up the cumulative benefits of everything. What else was in that speech that we need to consider?
Well, Anthony, your $5 tax cut, Peter Dutton will match that or beat it even with a cut to the fuel excise, which will save you $8 a week or $10 a week, or it's a bit vague, frankly, some relatively small amount a week in petrol
Kill me.
He's trying to pitch this as immediate, whereas the tax cut doesn't kick in till 2026. But I mean, again, Anthony, this isn't for the long-term benefit of the country.
No.
You know, this goes straight to people who are driving petrol-powered cars, which I thought we were trying to reduce the number of those over time. And again, it's just a vote buyer when people would prefer long-term reform. You know, again, thanks for the offer on the petrol, Pete, but can you whack that in your housing policy? Can we sort that out? Can we invest in some infrastructure that makes the place work better? I don't know. Again, it just feels his main thing feels like a sort of lolly that is trying to win us over.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, James, you haven't mentioned the G word, gas.
Gas,
There's a bit of
yes.
gas. This was actually something from out of the two parties that might actually appeal to business. He's talking about redirecting more of the export gas into domestic markets to try and bring down the price of gas in Australia, maybe hopefully bring down the price of energy bills as well. I mean, that's something that I expect business could latch onto out of all the things we've seen this week.
Yeah, I think some businesses will support it, Anthony. Manufacturers will like it and have been calling for something like that. But the gas industry will hate it. I mean, they've got these big export contracts that they thought were, you know, they've negotiated in good faith, and now an interventionist government's interfering in the market and telling them where to send their gas. So look, it's not without risk. It's not without cost. You know, if you're a gas buyer in Japan, you're now looking at America trying to drill and Australia trying to interfere in the gas market, and you're saying, okay, well, I know where I'm going for my next cargoes or contracts of gas. The one thing that gets me, Anthony, again, it's a pretty short-term measure. We're sort of being fed a lot of BS on energy, aren't we? We keep sort of getting told by politicians that they can keep prices down, but we're in the middle of an energy transition. I don't know if you believe Peter Dutton, we're transitioning to nuclear. If you believe Labor, we're transitioning to renewables. Whatever we're transitioning to, and gas is a transition fuel, it's going to be more expensive. There's a lot more money that needs to be spent, either on a fleet of nuclear reactors or on the renewable build-out that is already underway. I mean, again, I just see this gas policy as pretty short term, a bit of a band-aid over a big long-term thorny issue that we need to tackle properly.
Yeah, I agree with you, James. I think that rising energy cost, that's kind of, you know, threat number 2 to Australia if you look at the next 10 or 20 years, and the economy is going to go so much better if there's cheap energy. But it looks like it's not going to be there. Now, just lastly, James, who won budget week, Labor or Liberal?
Yeah, I'm not sure, Anthony. I mean, I thought it was probably, I thought it was probably a draw, and then you get the election called on the Friday, which sort of means the budget week was almost like a practice match, and we now enter the real thing. So I'm sitting on the fence there a bit. Look, I think Dutton's momentum, it feels like it's slowed a bit in the last few weeks. The tax cut surprise was pretty well played, and it wedged Dutton. Dutton responded, you know, in pretty good form as well, I think, trying to say, this is an insult, people see through this. Here's a little vote buyer of my own. So, yeah, I'm not sure budget week is going to decide many votes. That's probably the way I'm thinking of it. Did you see a winner?
I think Labor won budget week, James, because at the end of the day, they're the incumbents. They've got all the seats. We're going to get to this in the election section, I know. But, you know, they threw out some lollies, which, while you and I might not agree with, I think, you know, some voters out there will. Yep. But really, it's up to the opposition to try and wrestle the whole economic argument, the whole who's better in charge of the budget away from Labor. And I'm just not sure that happens. So that's why I put it down for a win for Labor.
Fair enough.
Now, James, like I said, overshadowing the budget this year was the upcoming election, which was supposed to have been called a few weeks ago, but was finally called on Friday morning. Australians will head to the polls on May 3. The Australian Labor Party starts well in front. Notionally, it has 78 seats in the House of Representatives at the moment, while the coalition has 57, notionally at least. There are 13 independents, including the all-important Teals, 4 Greens, and 2 more members from the minor parties. James, you would think that lead alone, and the fact that first-term government hasn't lost an election since the 1930s, would have Labor as the strong favourites. However, the bookies have them only just in front of the coalition. What do you think that means?
Well, I think there's a couple of things going on here, Anthony. One is that Dutton's had a pretty good year. Since January, he's made a fair bit of ground. He's fought his way back into the contest. As I said, I think that momentum's waned a little bit in recent weeks, but he's made this a much closer race than it seemed 12 months ago. That's point one. And point two, as you mentioned, we've got so many independents, Greens, other minor parties involved here. There is this potential for those independents, including the Teals and the minor parties, to sort of hold the balance of power in an election. So that makes it a little more tricky to see either Labor or the coalition winning outright. Probably we're going to see some form of minority government where either Labor or Liberal will govern with the support of the independents and minor parties. And that's just tricky. That's messy. That's not easy for bookies or pollsters to predict. But it does feel like that's where we're going. I mean, you gave the numbers there. The coalition is starting from a long way back.
Way back, yeah.
Way back. And I saw another fact from the AFR's political guru, Phil Coorey, today. An opposition leader who was appointed opposition leader after losing government has never regained government straight away. So Dutton's got a bit of history to fight as well. But it's going to come down to some extent to what happens in Victoria. The Liberals need to win a lot of votes in Victoria and a lot of seats in Victoria. That's possible because the state government here of Jacinta Allen, state Labor government's on the nose.
Yeah.
But the maths just make it really hard for Dutton, I think. But Anthony, we're all going to obsess over those maths and the intricacies of the campaign. But what are the big issues that this poll's going to be fought over?
Well, I saw Anthony Albanese had his Medicare card out at the press conference talking about
I saw that too.
Fighting for Australian values. I mean, Labor clearly thinks there's mileage in that story, and the whole Medicare tactics that the coalition would chop Medicare. I mean, he tries to tell us that the richest Australians, and he said Kerry Packer, which sort of shows you the audience he's speaking to, get the same treatment as himself for his mother. Is that true, James? Like, I mean, do we seriously think that the healthcare system's a level playing field? Like, has he ever tried to book a specialist appointment or even something like a, diagnostic test, an MRI, a colonoscopy or whatever? If you call up and you're a private patient, the doctor will do it for you next week. If you're a public patient, it's come back in 6 months, 12 months.
Yeah.
But I can understand the politics of what he's saying.
Yeah.
He's focused on the public health system. But James, issue number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is cost of living, right?
Yep.
The budget showed that cost of living pressures have eased because inflation's back at about 2.5%. The mortgage rates are back at sort of 6%. You can get a little bit under that as well. But the inflation, the rise of costs, it's so fresh in people's mind. And just because the inflation is eased and the costs aren't going up as fast as they used to, doesn't mean the costs haven't gone up at all, right?
Yeah.
Like the price of food is still 30% more expensive than it was 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And everyone sees that every time they go to the supermarket or any time they try and buy a sandwich or a meat pie or whatever. So the cost of living is still so fresh in people's mind. And underneath the cost of living, James, we get to the really big issues, right? Housing, energy costs, they're sort of wrapped up in that bucket as well. I mean, housing, we talk about it all the time, James. I mean, talk to young people, talk to old people. Everyone realises this is a real cross-generational one in Australia. who's best to fix the housing crisis? How's the government's 1.2 million homes a year plan in the next 5 years going? That should be a strong election issue. And the only other one that's sort of outside the cost of living, James, I'd say, is just the national security, Trump, trade, relations. Who's better to handle Trump? I mean, that's something else we saw come up at that Albanese press conference. But I'll tell you what the election issues are not, James. You know, tax reform, red tape, competition policy, infrastructure spending, getting rid of stupid state-level regulations that make it hard to run a national business, all that stuff that big business would like to see happen. None of that's on the radar, unfortunately. James, the elections have been running hot globally. There were more elections last year than any other year in history.
Yeah.
You actually wrote about a few of them on the way through and just how big a year it was for elections. Was there anything we learnt in elections from offshore, whether it's Trump or anyone else, that's going to be applicable for the next 5 or so weeks as we go through this campaign?
Yep, Anthony. My old friend, Macquarie strategist Victor Schvetz.
Oh, yeah.
He says there's two I's that decide elections: inflation and inequality.
Uh-huh.
So voters hate inflation, absolutely hate it. And they hate it because it makes them feel like they're falling further behind. And so the sense of inequality rises, whether that's real or not. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. That's the problem. So we saw last year, I think 80% of the elections around the globe, and there was a lot, the incumbent was either kicked out or had their majority greatly reduced. And it all comes back to cost of living pressures and inflation. So, you know, I guess in defence of Albanese and Dutton, what they're saying about tax and petrol excise, we might say, oh, please, guys, focus on the big issues. But their polling, their research would be telling them that this is the big issue. This is the one we need to address. So they're trying to get on top of that. But look, the problem with inflation and inequality is it leads to populist decision making, leads to populist policy, leads to more polarized society. So that's what we've got to be worried about. We've got to be careful about. I think both Dutton and Albanese have said on Friday morning that they want to run positive campaigns and Australia's the best place in the world.
Yeah, right.
But let's see how long that lasts. One other little factor, Anthony, that feeds into that inflationary inequality outlook is what's happening with the broader economy's progress. It looks like we're on track for a soft landing, but the RBA board's meeting next week. Do you think the RBA should be nervous about what might happen in the election?
Oh, well, governments and oppositions, they can't help but try and sprinkle the lollies at this time in the cycle, James. And
yeah,
you can understand why. I'm sure if you or I were in politics and came around to this time of the cycle, we'd be doing exactly the same thing. You know, we're through the budget now. There's probably not too much in the budget for the RBA to worry about. Like we said, the tax cuts, while they're there, and they're pretty minor. The stage 3 tax cuts from last year were much more material. I mean, the government, what I thought was interesting, and one of our former Chanticleer legends pointed this out to both of us this week, James. Like the growth forecasts in the budget were actually reasonably good in terms of the GDP growth. They're better than it has been. So I think the budget talked about 2.25% growth in FY26, 2.5% FY27. That's kind of in line with the RBA, what they'd expected, maybe a little bit better. Unemployment forecast in the budget were 4.25% for the next few years. The RBA's been about 4.2%. So kind of, on the same page. So I think, the RBA board meets next week. It's not ideal time to be making decisions just in terms of, it becomes very political, right? Whatever you do at this time in the cycle can get very political. I was looking at the 30-day interbank futures this morning, James, which is basically a bet on interest rates. It's saying there's not going to be a cut next week. It's saying only 8% chance of a cut. And I think the elections run one reason why, it creates a bit of uncertainty, perhaps best to sit it out. But the main reason why, James, is the economy. It's kind of going along on track, I think, as the RBA wants it to. And why disrupt that just now?
Yeah, I think you're right. RBA sitting on its hands and probably pretty happy that it cut when it did so it can stay out of the election. They've probably played this pretty well, I reckon. All right, Anthony, let's head to a break. We'll be back after the break to preview what I reckon is going to be one of the biggest weeks on global markets in some time. Back in a sec. Well, welcome back. If you want to know more about what we're talking about today and a whole lot more, AFR subscribers can sign up to the Chanticleer newsletter at join.afr.com/Chanticleer. Every Saturday morning, the newsletter pulls together the best Chanticleer columns from the week and delivers them straight to your inbox. All right, Anthony, so a big week ahead. RBA rates decision on Tuesday, no change there. AFR Workplace Summit in Sydney on Tuesday as well. Lots of work from home chat, you'd think?
Yeah, fair bit of work from home, hybrid, flexible working, industrial relations. It's going to be quite a meaty day.
Yeah. And then on Wednesday morning, our time, Liberation Day.
Oh, yeah.
Donald Trump announces his reciprocal tariffs. Nobody quite knows what we're going to get. This will be an absolute market mover. This will weigh on markets, I reckon, for the next month at least, as people try and sort through the initial reaction. So full coverage on afr.com Wednesday, and I imagine Thursday, Friday, and even on this podcast on Friday next week. And Anthony, just to quickly, HMC Capital Investor Day on April 3. HMC Capital, it's the sort of funds management financial giant run by former investment banker David DePilla. Shares are under a bit of pressure here, and this is a bit of a important moment for DePilla to rally the troops. It is.
HMC Capital investors really need their fearless leader David DePilla to come out and fire everyone up with some good news next week. I think if this Investor Day is lacking in some good news and some progress, then this skepticism around his whole business model could grow.
Yeah, okay. Well, we did our question from Kevin from the Northern Rivers earlier. If you've got a question you want to send in, you can email us at chanticleer@afr.com. You can also send us a question in audio form. Just record a voice memo on your phone, include your name and where you're from, and email it to us. Well, Anthony, a big week in finance, a big week in markets, a big week in deal making, and a huge week in politics. And I think, mate, we're in for a big month or so now.
You've got me excited for Liberation Day, James. I don't think I'm going to sleep this weekend.
Well, imagine how excited they are down at Dollarama about it. The tariff walls are either going up or down, and the good people at Dollarama, they'll be ready to profit either way, I reckon.
The Canadians.
Anthony, can't wait for this. Can't wait for next week. It's going to be a beauty.
Yes, thank you, James.
See you all next week. If you like the podcast and you want to hear more, consider sharing or giving the podcast a review, as it helps other listeners find us. And don't forget to follow wherever you get your podcasts. At The Financial Review, we investigate the big stories about markets, business and power. For more, go to afr.com and you can subscribe to The Financial Review, the daily habit of successful people, at afr.com/subscribe. Chanticleer was hosted by me, James Thompson, and Anthony McDonald, and it was produced by Alex Gow and Lap Fan. Our theme is by Alex Gow, head of podcast is Lap Fan, and the head of premium content is Fiona Buffini.
The Australian Financial Review.